News today, Toronto's housing market is heating back up. Stack that against new polling from Ipsos done for Global that shows dreams of home ownership in this country may be out of reach. The poll shows that 69% of Canadians they surveyed agree that owning a home is now only for the rich. And among those who don't already own one, 63% say they have given up on ever owning one. Let's bring back the front bench, Stephen McNeil, Gary Marr, Melanie Richer, and Joyce Napier to talk about that. Stephen, I'll start with you. I saw those numbers today, and it sort of like quantified what I feel like a lot of people among my social groups and are talking about, which is, you know, there's the issue of affordable housing for sure, but there's also affordable housing even when you thought you would be able to afford one, basically. I'm wondering if you think governments are seized to the degree they should be, or if it's just too hard to solve politically.
No, listen, this is something that, quite frankly, when I was in office, was a major concern for me. I think all Canadians should be worried about it. If you look at individually, this is where many of us have created our wealth over our lifetime. For many of Canadians who are not in pension plans, this is where they were able to prepare for retirement and see what retirement would look like for them. So I think we all should be concerned. Not only do governments need to kind of address this, we need to look at the banking system and the stress test that goes on coming into original mortgage. How can we help support that? I think governments can do public policy, but this will require the banks across this country to realize the impact this is having on young people. And let's bear in mind that not everyone is looking to get into the housing market, but the reality of it is there's a fair number of Canadians who are well into their 30s, if not later, before the first time buying a home, and that will impact what the retirement looks like. So I believe it's solvable, but it will require more than governments. It will require public institutions to recognize they have a role to play when it comes to helping Canadians enter into their first home.
I think on the demand side, that certainly makes a lot of sense, Melanie. On the supply side, there is, I'm not saying a role, I don't know for certain a role for government, but there is certainly a debate right now, a very live one on the federal political scene about what that role could look like. And I'm saying that in the way of, you know, Jagmeet Singh pressing the government on not doing enough on housing, on Pierre Poilievre saying, I will get rid of the gatekeepers. This is my number one issue, getting you out of your mom's basement, right? And the Prime Minister kind of articulating a plan that's been in place for a number of years that was kind of rejigged in the last budget, but having some difficulty, I think, at least appearing to express a level of empathy that many Canadians might want to hear.
Totally, and it's just getting worse, right? Even we had this, I can't remember what year exactly it was, but the Liberals put forward their housing plan, and it was celebrated because this was going to be so good for folks. And we haven't really seen it. Pardon me?
I think it was 2017, if I remember.
Oh, yes, that makes sense. I didn't want to say 2016. 2017 makes more sense. But since then, we haven't really seen it actually affect people in a real way, which is why I think folks are getting more and more frustrated. I don't own a home. I would love to own a home. It feels so impossible as a young person who has a good salary, who has a good job, to buy a home right now. And, you know, Ottawa is not the worst market to live in. So, It's tricky too, because a lot of the policies that come forward oftentimes are policies that address housing, or not housing affordability, but affordable housing. And for folks who are looking to buy a home, a lot of the policies don't actually help them get into the market. And then when you're competing against corporations who are buying up the housing stock, it just sort of feels like, well, what chance do I have to get in here? The one thing that I do find, and I know this is politics, but the one thing that I do find is frustrating is Mr. Poilievre's talking points, because there's no solutions. At least put forward a solution. Tell me what you're going to do, because without actual policy to change things, this isn't going to get any better.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism, Gary. I think the solution that so far Mr. Poilievre has put forward involves basically tying federal money to municipal housing supply and the regulations around that, which is also a bigger role for government, in effect. Who knows if it will work? But this, I think the fact that it's one of his primary messages is worth noting. Like, I'm not saying good or bad, but it is interesting that the exact situation that Melanie described, the people who are saying, I have a good job, I make pretty good money, and I still cannot get my foot in the door. Like, those are some pretty ripe voters.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge political issue, and but there's a lot of different factors involved here. I mean, first of all, if you look at municipal zoning as an example, and if we look at two key markets being Vancouver and Toronto, 64% of the land zoned in Vancouver is restricted to single-family homes. In the city of Toronto, I think it's about 55%. And so this really prevents greater densification in these communities. So you can't build townhouses, for example, in those areas. So I'm not even talking about high rises. I'm talking about, sort of something other than a single family home. The second piece is on the supply side. I'm in Toronto today, as I said, and I was speaking with somebody who was talking on behalf of builders. And this one builder said, look, I could get 1,000 people. I could hire them today and get them to work tomorrow, but I can't find them. So the human capital, the framers, the drywallers, the plumbers, the electricians, it's a huge issue. And his solution, in part, was with respect to immigration, bringing in people that have such skills. But immigration is a two-edged sword. If we go to 500,000 new Canadians in the year 2025, which I think is the federal government's stated ambition. Let's say they come in twos. Are there 250,000 housing starts that are going to be going? The answer is no, there are not. And so you've got an issue where human capital and immigration is part of the challenge, but it's also part of the solution. And then you've got mortgage rates, and
right.
Stephen and I are certainly old enough to remember, back in the early 1980s, mortgages were at 17, 18, 19%. The difference is that it was a lot easier to cover the mortgage cost on a $150,000 home than it is on a $500,000 home. And so there's a lot of different factors. The solutions don't rest just with the federal government. There have to be issues provincially, federally, and municipally to be able to work together and solve these things.
I think that's all right, Joyce. I have just a minute left. My gut tells me, though, it will be a hot issue, and whenever the federal election
it is. But,
comes
I want to be the optimist in the room, because I remember when interest rates were that high, and also when unemployment was over 10%. And I remember thinking, I will never get a job and I'll never buy a house. Well, I have a job and I bought a house. So I want to tell these people who are discouraged, yeah, it looks bad. There are periods in a society, and this is a bad one. And we don't know if, and there's also the fact that we have too many regulations, very difficult to build. But we got a lot of space in Canada. My parents come from Cairo. There was no space there. But here, there's a lot of space. So there's space. It is an issue, and it will get solved. There will be inventory out there. This has got to change. It's not going to stay this way. Even good situations change and turn into bad ones. So bad situations turn into good ones.
Hey,
so I'm optimistic.
I never get to end the show on that kind of a note. Okay, we'll leave it on that point, on that note of optimism. Thanks so much to our front bench panel, Gary Marr, Melanie Richer, Stephen McNeil, and Joyce Napier.